Senator Camila Hayes, a respected leader in her community, had just wrapped up her weekly visit with her mother. As the afternoon sunlight glinted off her car, she casually strolled toward it, grocery bags in hand, unaware of the police cruiser that had silently parked behind her. Officer Janice Salazar, an experienced and no-nonsense cop, was on her usual patrol route when she noticed Camila through the rear-view mirror. The scene seemed off to her, a woman alone, wandering through the sparsely populated part of the parking lot, peering into the windows of her car, seemingly distracted. "What's she up to?" Janice muttered under her breath, her instincts kicking in. Without a second thought, she parked her cruiser and got out, her hand instinctively resting near her gun, ready for whatever was to come. To Janice, this was just another stop, another person to question, a civilian she didn't recognize. "Excuse me, ma'am," Janice called sharply, striding toward Camila. The firm authority in her tone caught Camila off guard. She turned around, surprised, her posture immediately stiffening. "Yes, officer?" Camila responded, trying to keep her voice even. "What are you doing here?" Janice asked, her words laced with suspicion. Camila blinked, taken aback. "I'm just loading my groceries into my car," she explained calmly. "I need to see your ID," Janice snapped, her fingers tapping against the holster on her belt, her impatience palpable. Camila felt her pulse quicken, but she stayed composed. "Is there a reason, officer?" "I haven't done anything wrong." Janice's jaw clenched, but she remained unmoved. "Just show me your ID, ma'am, and I'll decide that," she insisted, the command in her voice unmistakable. With a sigh, Camila reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet, handing over her driver's license. Janice snatched it without a word and inspected it carefully. "Senator Camila Hayes," she muttered, raising an eyebrow. "Never heard of you." "I'm a state senator," Camila replied, trying to keep the conversation civil. "I represent District 12, but Janice wasn't interested in Camila's credentials. She glanced at the ID again, then slipped it into her pocket like it was evidence in a case. "I don't care who you are, Senator," she said dismissively. "Something doesn't sit right with me about you being here." Camila's disbelief was evident. "Officer, this is a public mall," she said, her voice steady but frustrated. "I have the right to be here, just like everyone else." Janice crossed her arms, blocking the path to Camila's car. "You can explain that at the station." "I'm taking you in." Camila tried to protest, but Janice wasn't listening. As the officer led her toward the cruiser, ignoring her pleas to speak with a lawyer, onlookers stared in confusion. They could barely understand what this well-dressed woman could have possibly done to warrant such treatment. As Janice drove, her focus remained unwavering on the road ahead, her expression unreadable. Camila sat silently in the back of the cruiser, taking deep breaths to calm herself. She knew the situation was unjust, but she also knew that she would be released soon. There was no real reason to hold her. Still, the frustration of being detained for no reason gnawed at her. When they arrived at the station, Janice parked with a sharp turn, ushering Camila inside. They passed a row of officers and detectives, all of them glancing up as they walked by, their eyes lingering on the sight of a state senator in cuffs. Some whispered among themselves, but Janice ignored their curious stares. She led Camila down the narrow hall and shoved her into a small, dimly lit room. The metal table in the center of the room reflected the harsh overhead lights, and the stark chairs felt cold and unwelcoming. "Wait here," Janice snapped, leaving the room with a loud clang of the door. For what felt like hours, Camila sat in silence, her mind racing, but the room was empty. Time dragged on. Finally, Lieutenant Jordan Pierce, Janice's superior, entered the room. He was a tall, middle-aged man with a calm face, but a firm air about him. He'd been alerted to Camila's arrest and was eager to understand why a state senator had been detained for such an odd reason. "Senator Hayes," Lieutenant Pierce greeted, his voice both professional and curious. "Let's get to the bottom of this." "I'm Lieutenant Pierce," he said, extending his hand toward Camila. His voice was calm and authoritative, but there was a trace of concern in his eyes. "I apologize for any inconvenience." Camila gratefully shook his hand. "Lieutenant, thank you for coming. I'd appreciate it if someone could explain why I was arrested." Pierce frowned as he flipped through the report Officer Salazar had hastily filed. His eyes widened as he read it. "According to Officer Salazar, she found you acting suspiciously in a parking lot." Camila's eyebrows shot up. "Suspicious? I was shopping. Is that a crime now?" Pierce shook his head, an uncomfortable expression settling on his face.
"No, ma'am."
"It's not. This doesn't make any sense." Just as the tension hung in the air, the door swung open, and Officer Janice Salazar entered the room, clearly unaware that her superior was already speaking with Camila. She held up the ID. "I've got her ID, Lieutenant." Caught her wandering around like she owns the place. Pierce turned to face her, his eyes narrowing. "Officer Salazar," he said, his voice dripping with disbelief. "I hope you realize who you've arrested." Janice's smirk faded as she saw the shift in his tone. "Who?" she asked, her voice suddenly uncertain.
Pierce set his jaw.
"This is Senator Camila Hayes. You're aware she's one of the most respected leaders in our state, right?" Janice's face turned pale. I didn't know." Pierce's voice grew cold, cutting through the air like ice. "You should have taken her ID seriously, officer. You've overstepped your authority on shaky grounds." His words rang out in the small room, heavy with authority. Janice was stunned, her eyes widening as the weight of the situation dawned on her. She had never imagined that a simple, suspicious arrest could go this wrong. "Lieutenant, Janice began, but Pierce silenced her with a stern look. "You've overstepped, officer," he said sharply. "This is harassment, plain and simple. You could be facing serious consequences." Camila, who had been silently observing, stood up. Her voice was calm, but firm as she addressed Pierce. "Lieutenant, I'm willing to let this go, but I do expect an explanation from Officer Salazar. I deserve that much at the very least." Janice shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet Camila's gaze. I thought you were someone else," she mumbled, her once confident tone crumbling. Pierce shook his head, the disappointment evident in his expression. "You made an arrest based on assumptions, officer. We don't make decisions like that in this department." By now, a few other officers had gathered near the door, drawn in by the unfolding drama. Whispers began to ripple through the room, and Janice's reputation, built over years of service, began to crumble in seconds. The realization that she had made such a critical mistake hit her hard, and she could feel her career slipping away. Pierce finally spoke again, his tone final and unyielding. "Officer Salazar, I'm afraid I have no choice but to suspend you, pending an investigation." Janice's face turned bright red, her pride shattered, but she stayed silent. She knew better than to argue further. It would only make things worse. She had already lost. As Camila left the station, free at last, Janice sat alone in the small, dimly lit room. Her badge had been confiscated, and her sense of pride lay in tatters. She knew that the moment she acted out of prejudice was the moment she sealed her fate. In the end, it was justice that had prevailed, but it wasn't the kind she had expected. She was no longer the strict, hard-nosed officer. She was now the officer who lost everything over an unjust arrest. And so, this story ends. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, don't hesitate to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Turn on the notification bell so you won't miss more fascinating stories. Have a great day.